How's it going, everyone? It's Harvey from Weather Sponge 5000, and in this video we're going to focus on this gyre that's located right around Central America that could potentially develop not only a Pacific tropical cyclone but an Atlantic tropical cyclone as well in the future, where it could interact with many areas along the Central American coast and potentially maybe the Gulf Coast. But before I begin, make sure to subscribe if you want to see more weather-related content. Make sure to like if you like this video, and make sure to turn on post notifications if you want to see even more weather-related content. So let's begin by taking a look at the GFS model, which has been the model very persistent on bringing some sort of tropical storm, or at least developing some sort of tropical storm into next week. We've been talking about it over the past several days, and so far I admit not much progress has been made when it comes to the certainty with the forecast, because while the GFS model is still persistent on developing at least a little bit of a low level center and a tropical storm just off the coast of southern Mexico, the European model is still not really persisting any idea that there's going to be a tropical cyclone in the Atlantic. But since the GFS model has been persistent on developing some sort of tropical cyclone along the Central American coast, then there could be some truth to it, because now we're almost approaching that time period where it could become more certain that a tropical cyclone will develop just off Central American coast. Because if we were to take a look at the 126-hour mark, just right around the 5-day mark, as early as the 5-day mark, you see that the GFS model now does develop a low-level center, which could potentially develop into a tropical cyclone. Of course, I shouldn't say only 5 days out, because 5 days out is still there's still a lot that could change between now and 5 days. But relatively speaking, from what the previous videos where we were talking about a 7 to 8 day period out where a tropical cyclone could develop, now we're getting closer and closer to where maybe there could be more certainty with the GFS model forecast, since it's 5 days out as opposed to 7 to 8 days out. But just keep in mind that the uncertainty is still high with this forecast. We do see that the GFS model does develop at least some sort of low pressure system, which could maybe develop into Tropical Storm Bonnie. However, it isn't taking a tropical cyclone as strong as previously forecasted, because you see that while we do see a low pressure system develop, it still isn't necessarily extremely strong or necessarily at tropical storm force strength, and it might not reach that point until maybe it reaches the Gulf of Mexico, where the GFS model does want to linger. And what's interesting is that even if this low pressure system does not develop into Tropical Storm Bonnie, we have to keep in mind that after that we're gonna see a pretty long-lasting gyre throughout Central America. And as you know, typically during the early portion of the hurricane season, especially, it's we're bound to see maybe a low pressure system or tropical cyclone develop out of this gyre, which is certainly a possibility that you definitely need to at least be aware of throughout the Caribbean, as well as the Gulf of those along the Gulf of Mexico, because gyres are easily more than capable of developing some sort of low pressure system that does have the potential into developing into a tropical cyclone. And we're seeing that in the Pacific, where at potentially as early as Monday we could see some sort of low pressure system that does have the possibility of developing. Now, taking a look at the European model, however, like I've been saying, the European model still isn't lenient on developing any sort of tropical cyclone, as it doesn't expect enough moisture or enough lift in the atmosphere or convection to really induce a tropical storm. That, however, it does develop some tropical storms just off the Pacific coast in the long-term future. And while for the Caribbean, there isn't really any sign of not even a low pressure system or well-defined low pressure system developing off the Atlantic coast. But the fact that the European model, that the GFS model wants to develop a gyre right around the Yucatan Peninsula, that could mean that we might be in a pattern in the future where we could see a tropical cyclone, not necessarily in the near future, but potentially more in the long-term future, develop somewhere right in the Gulf of Mexico or Caribbean, right around the late June timeframe. Now, the reason why the European model isn't necessarily lenient on developing any sort of tropical cyclone, we first have to take a look at the wind shear forecast. You see that the wind shear over the next several days, especially in the long-term future, where where a low pressure system does have the highest possibility of developing, we're going to see that the wind shear is, at least in the European model's case, is a little bit too strong for a well-defined low pressure system to develop. And not only that, the upper level winds are going against where tropical storm Bonnie wants to go, because or where the typical surface winds are moving, because of course surface winds in this part of the world typically move from more of a southerly to northerly direction, as the trade winds typically shift as a result of a Coriolis effect, and that creates a more of a southerly flow right around this area. This is a northwesterly flow, and that's pretty much going completely against the the wind direction that the surface winds are going to. So as a result, the wind shear is a bit stronger for any sort of well-defined low pressure system to develop. There could be maybe a possibility into the late week. We have to see, but the European model just doesn't want to develop anything as a result of a lack of moisture for the most part, because while the wind shear does subside in the long-term future, the amount of stable air does not, and it's especially going to be compounded by the fact that we're going to see quite an abundance of Saharan dust moving through the Caribbean over the next several days. So that should stabilize the atmosphere quite a bit, because the Saharan dust does create a temperature inversion where the surface air mass would sink because it's cooler than the Saharan dust, which pretty much prevents the water vapor from rising up and prevents convection from occurring. So as a result of the dry air, we're likely not going to see a high probability of this developing over the next several days. Taking a look at the amount of dry air that the European model is expecting at this time, we do see that while there is certainly a pocket of moisture existing right around the southwestern Caribbean, it isn't enough to really induce a highly convective environment for a well-defined low pressure system to develop, which is a stark contrast from what we're seeing from the GFS model. So pretty much case in point, there's still a high amount of uncertainty. Unfortunately, I can't give a much more confident forecast than I've been giving over the past several days, because this tropical storm is still relatively far out, and we're going to need to see which computer model will pretty much lean towards one side or the other over the next several days to really determine if we will see tropical storm Bonnie in the near future. Now, taking a look at the Saharan dust forecast, you see that we're seeing an abundance of Saharan dust move through the Caribbean, and that could inhibit a tropical cyclone from developing right around the southwestern Caribbean. So that's definitely something to be aware of. However, it is expected we could see this subside over the next several days, but we need to still pay very close attention to the Saharan dust that's pretty much swallowing up a lot of the Caribbean at this time. So pretty much playing the forecast, we do see the dry air continuing to move westward. However, you see that the dry air does subside a little bit right around southwestern Caribbean, which could be that small area that the low pressure needs to develop into tropical storm Bonnie. So that's something to keep in mind over the next several days. The amount of Saharan dust will be key in determining how much the probability that tropical storm Bonnie does develop in the Caribbean. Now, I'm taking a look at my forecast of where tropical storm Bonnie could develop pretty much anywhere in this area. This pretty much hugging the coast of the Caribbean, of Central America, which will also be key, because the amount of this storm interacts with land will be key in determining whether or not we'll see a well-defined low pressure system off the Central American coast to see tropical storm Bonnie. But we have to wait and see how the steering currents will move over the next several days. Still highly uncertain, but I'll make sure to keep you guys updated over the next several days as certainty becomes higher. And of course, along the southern Mexican coast, you need to pay attention to Pacific tropical cyclones, because they're also likely headed into this week. But anyways, guys, I thank you guys for watching. Make sure to subscribe if you want to see more weather-related content. Make sure to like if you like this video, and make sure to turn on post notifications if you want to see even more weather-related content. And I hope you guys all have a great day.